Hello, Midnights. You are listening to your favorite bedtime stories. Next up, The Architecture of Deception, Dr. Karla Turner and the Evolution of Abduction Theory. We hope you enjoy our stories. Let us know where you are tuning in from, and while you're here, please consider subscribing. It really helps keeping these stories coming. Thank you. The intellectual trajectory of Dr. Karla Turner represents one of the most significant and polarizing shifts in the history of 20th century anomalous research. Before becoming a central figure in the study of non-human intelligence, Turner was an established scholar of the humanities, a background that fundamentally shaped her analytical approach to the abduction phenomenon. Holding a PhD in Old English studies, she spent over a decade as a university instructor in Texas, grounded in the rigorous traditions of philology and literary history. This academic pedigree is not merely a biographical footnote, it served as the foundational lens, through which she would later examine the narratives of those claiming contact with the unknown. In the field of Old English, one must pass through layers of linguistic drift, cultural filters, and fragmented manuscripts to find a kernel of historical or psychological truth. When Turner turned her attention to the abduction phenomenon in 1988, she applied this same textual scrutiny to the manuscripts of human memory, treating the testimony of abductees as a complex, often corrupted text that required deep structural analysis. The transition from the lecture hall to the Fringe was not a choice born of idle curiosity, but a response to a personal and familial crisis. In the spring of 1988, Turner, her husband Elton, and their son began to uncover a series of anomalies that shattered their conventional reality. These were not merely sightings of lights in the sky, but intrusive, physical encounters that left behind tangible markers, unexplained scarring, episodes of missing time, and the disturbing presence of visitors in their home. Her first book, Into the Fringe, published in 1992, documents this initial descent into the world of UFOs and non-human entities. Unlike many of her contemporaries who approached the subject through the lens of psychology or nuts and bolts engineering, Turner approached it as a scholar of narratives, recognizing that the stories being told by victims and herself represented a species-wide recurrent nightmare, that the official structures of politics and science were ill-equipped to acknowledge. The primary contribution of Into the Fringe to the ufological canon was its unflinching focus on the domesticity of the abduction experience. Turner argued that the phenomenon did not occur in a vacuum, but was woven into the fabric of everyday life, often affecting entire family units over multiple generations. Through the use of personal journals and transcripts of hypnotic regression, Turner and her husband began to reconstruct a timeline of interference that reached back into their respective childhoods, suggesting that the alien was a persistent long-term presence. This realization led to a radical reassessment of human autonomy as she began to perceive that the entities involved were not merely extraterrestrial, visitors from another planet, but were perhaps interdimensional beings or ultra-terrestrials capable of manipulating the very fabric of local reality. The evidence presented in Into the Fringe was not limited to the subjective. Turner meticulously noted physical indicators such as unusual body marks, which appeared following nights of suspected contact, and the presence of missing time, gaps in conscious memory ranging from minutes to hours. Turner described the process of uncovering these memories as the end of a world, an exile from a shared reality, of safety and predictability into a territory where the very fabric of reality was subject to change. Her refusal to interpret these experiences as spiritual awakenings, a trend popularized by some of her peers, set her on a collision course with the more optimistic segments of the UFO community. To Turner, an intrusion that occurred without consent, utilized deception, and left behind trauma could not be considered benevolent. Somatic markers like scoop marks, straight-line incisions, and triangular patterns appearing overnight without inflammation served as physical evidence of this intrusion. Furthermore, temporal disruptions involving missing time and perceived virtual reality environments suggested the flow of time was being altered, while domestic Anomalies like poltergeist-like activity and electrical malfunctions often accompanied visual intrusions by shadowy figures or grey entities within the victim's home. In 1994, Turner published Taken: Inside the Alien-Human Abduction Agenda, a work that expanded her research from her own family to a cohort of 8 women. This study served to formalize her theory of a nefarious agenda, moving away from the Space Brothers narratives common in earlier decades. Turner's analysis of these cases revealed a pattern of manipulation that was both physical and psychological, involving the harvesting of human biological material and the systematic conditioning of the abductees. The women profiled in Taken, including figures like Pat, Polly, and Lisa, recounted experiences that challenged the existing framework of the friendly visitor. These accounts were characterized by a high degree of virtual reality scenarios where entities would project images or environments into the minds of the abductees to manage emotional responses. One of the most disturbing trends identified in Taken was the focus on human reproduction and sexuality. Turner documented cases where women were forced into sexual encounters with non-human beings or where their reproductive cycles were seemingly monitored or altered. Furthermore, Turner highlighted the presence of human personnel, often in military attire, operating alongside the alien entities, suggesting a degree of collusion between terrestrial power structures and the non-human intelligence, a theme often referred to as MILABs. Case analyses showed that abductees like Pat experienced interactions with grey entities and military personnel in deep, underground facilities, leading to feelings of coercion and fear of human-alien collaboration. Others, like Polly, reported poltergeist activity and obsessive relationships influenced by external manipulation, resulting in a complete avoidance of sexual relationships due to entity-induced trauma. Lisa and Beth documented sightings during pregnancy and surgical procedures that led to significant anxiety, disruption of family dynamics, and altered perceptions of spirituality. Turner's final major work, Masquerade of Angels, 1994, co-authored with psychic Ted Rice, represents the peak of her research into the deceptive nature of the phenomenon. Ted Rice was a gifted psychic whose life had been a steered and synchronistic journey characterized by visions and alien contact. Under the guidance of Turner and hypnotherapist Barbara Bartholic, Rice began to realize that his abilities and his angelic guides were part of an elaborate system of control. The masquerade refers to the entity's ability to manifest as religious figures, deceased loved ones, or space brothers to bypass human psychological defenses. Deep regression therapy revealed that many of his most spiritual experiences were actually screen memories, complex mental programs installed by the entities to hide more disturbing physical procedures. This led to a profound insight. The non-human entities were not just interested in biological material, but in the human life force itself. Rice recalled a terrifying memory of his original body being manipulated while his consciousness was held in a separate state, suggesting that the entities possessed the technology to extract and potentially transfer human consciousness. The book also explores the reptilian element of the phenomenon, with Rice recounting incidents where seemingly benevolent figures were revealed to be reptilian entities during moments of emotional or sexual vulnerability. This reinforced Turner's belief that the entities were essentially predatory and used virtual reality overlays to exploit human emotions. Dr. Karla Turner's theory was a radical departure from the prevailing models of her time. Her theory can be synthesized into several core pillars that redefine the relationship between humans and non-human entities. Central to her work was the concept that nearly everything an abductee remembers consciously is a fabrication by the entities designed for trauma suppression, compliance, and data protection. Turner believed that only the most rigorous deep trance regression could pierce these screens. Furthermore, she argued that the entities were engaged in a multifaceted harvesting operation, while the physical evidence of missing fetuses and scarred tissue supported a biological component. Her work with Ted Rice pointed toward an energetic or soul-based harvesting. She suggested that the entities might feed on or utilize human emotional states. Explaining the often traumatic and invasive nature of the encounters, This evil empire theory posited that humans were essentially chattel in a system of resource management. When compared to other major researchers, her focus on ethics, deception, and human collusion provided a nefarious and predatory perspective that contrasted with John Mack's spiritual and pedagogical focus, David Jacobs' focus on hybridization and biological colonization, or Bud Hopkins' scientific interest in genetic sampling. The most profound aspect of Karla Turner's work was her focus on the ethics of the situation. She applied a brave and defiant refusal to the abduction phenomenon, arguing that, no matter how advanced a being claimed to be, its actions defined its nature. If the interaction involved kidnapping and psychological manipulation, it was an act of tyranny, not enlightenment. Turner was particularly critical of the New Age interpretation of abductions, which encouraged victims to embrace their contact as a form of evolution, arguing that this was the ultimate victory of the entity's propaganda. Dr. Karla Turner's life was cut short in 1996 at the age of 48, following a rapid battle with breast cancer. Within the research community, her death remains a subject of intense speculation, with reports that she had received threats regarding her work prior to her illness. Despite her early death, her influence has grown, with her books reissued in the 2010s, featuring forewords by figures like Nick Pope and Linda Moulton Howe. Her work remains a cornerstone for those investigating the darker side of the paranormal, shifting the discourse from the mere existence of these beings to the profound ethical and psychological implications of their presence. The research conducted by Dr. Turner frequently emphasized that the abduction phenomenon was not a series of isolated incidents occurring in remote locations, but rather a persistent intrusion into the domestic sanctuary of the home. In Into the Fringe, Turner meticulously documents the erosion of the boundary between the normal world and the fringe world. This erosion often manifested as subtle changes in the home environment before escalating into full-blown abductions. Family members would report the sensation of being watched, the sudden onset of unusual odors, or the localized failure of household appliances. Turner noted that these events often targeted children, with many abductees recalling imaginary friends who were later identified through regression as non-human entities. The psychological impact of this domestic intrusion was profound. Turner described a state of permanent exile from the reality of safety as victims realized that their homes offered no protection against these entities. This realization often led to a breakdown in family dynamics as different members struggled to process their experiences or faced skepticism from their peers. Turner's own family experienced this firsthand, uncovering memories that suggested their lives had been monitored and manipulated for decades. This led her to hypothesize that the entities were not just visitors, but were perhaps embedded in our reality, existing in a netherworld that allowed them to interact with our physical space at will. One of the most controversial aspects of Dr. Turner's research was her documentation of military abductions, or MILABs. In Taken and her subsequent lectures, she presented evidence that human military and intelligence personnel were often present during abduction events. Abductees reported being taken to facilities that appeared terrestrial, involving elevators, medical equipment, and personnel dressed in standard military attire. Turner suggested that these human agencies were working in concert with the non-human entities, perhaps as part of a joint program involving genetic research or social engineering. This collusion hypothesis added a new layer of terror to the abduction experience. Victims were no longer just facing an incomprehensible alien threat, but were also being targeted by their own government. Turner documented cases where abductees were threatened by human personnel to keep their experiences secret, or where they were subjected to reprogramming sessions designed to instill specific screen memories. This led Turner to conclude that the secret government had entered into a deal with the NHEs, trading human lives for advanced technology or geopolitical control. This perspective aligned with her view of the evil empire, where both human and non-human elites exploited the general population. A key mechanism of control identified by Turner was the use of virtual reality scenarios, VRs. She argued that the entities possessed the technology to project complex, multi-sensory environments directly into the victim's mind, making it impossible to distinguish between physical reality and a projected illusion. These scenarios were used to test a victim's reactions, to extract specific emotional data, or to provide a pleasant cover for traumatic physical procedures. Turner noted that these VRS events often involved religious or spiritual themes designed to make the victim feel they were undergoing a transformative or chosen experience. In Masquerade of Angels, Ted Rice recounted scenarios where he was shown future events or spiritual truths that were later revealed to be fabrications. This technological manipulation of consciousness allowed the entities to steer the victim's life in a specific direction, ensuring their continued cooperation and providing a steady stream of emotional energy for the entities to harvest. While much of the abduction experience was hidden behind mental screens, Dr. Turner focused on the somatic record, the physical evidence left behind on the body. She was one of the first researchers to categorize the wide variety of marks found on abductees, noting that these marks often followed a specific surgical logic. Beyond the well-known scoop marks, she documented straight-line incisions that appeared overnight, triangular, bruising, and fingerprint bruises on the inner thighs and arms, suggesting forceful restraint. Turner also investigated the phenomenon of implants, small objects detected via medical imaging that were often located in the nasal cavity, behind the ear, or in the extremities. She hypothesized that these objects served multiple functions: tracking devices, neurological monitors, or even biological anchors that allowed the entities to maintain a connection with the victim across different dimensions. The presence of these physical objects was, for Turner, proof that the abduction phenomenon was a tangible physical intrusion and not merely a psychological or spiritual event. The chronology of her major works highlights the evolution of her findings, beginning with the 1992 publication of Into the Fringe, which documented the domestic and family abduction experience. This was followed by Taken in 1994, a multi-case study focusing on female abductees and reproductive agendas, and Masquerade of Angels in the same year, which analyzed psychic manipulation and interdimensional deception. These works were later reissued and consolidated in the 2010s and through the Dr. Karla Turner bundle in 2018. As Turner's research progressed, her view of the entities became increasingly grim. She moved away from the idea of aliens as biological explorers from other stars and began to view them as interdimensional predators. In her later lectures and the posthumously published Evil Empire of the ETs and the Ultra-Terrestrials, she proposed that humanity was caught in the middle of a conflict between different non-human factions. These entities, she argued, did not just want our DNA, they wanted our life force or soul. This perspective was heavily influenced by her work with Ted Rice, who experienced the extraction of his consciousness and its temporary placement in a non-human container. Turner theorized that the entities were essentially energy vampires who utilized the intense emotions generated during abductions, fear, pain, and sexual arousal, as a resource. This explained why the encounters were so often traumatic and why the entities utilized deception to lure victims into vulnerable states. The masquerade was not just a protective measure for the entities, but a harvesting tool. In the face of such a terrifying reality, Dr. Turner emphasized the ethical imperative of resistance. She argued that the first step to recovery for any abductee was the recognition of their own autonomy, by piercing the screen memories and acknowledging the reality of their trauma. Victims could begin to reclaim their lives from the entity's control. Turner was a fierce advocate for the rights of abductees, providing a platform for their stories and challenging the academic and scientific communities to take the phenomenon seriously. Her work with Barbara Bartholick utilized deep hypnosis not just as a research tool, but as a form of mental liberation. By allowing the abductee to see through the deceptive overlays, they could confront the true nature of their visitors. Turner's legacy is defined by this brave and defiant refusal to be a passive victim of a superior intelligence. She believed that even if the entities were vastly more powerful, the human spirit possessed a fundamental right to self-determination that no angelic or extraterrestrial power could ethically override. Following Karla's death in 1996, the preservation of her work fell to her husband, Elton Turner. For years, her books remained out of print, becoming legendary underground, texts that fetched hundreds of dollars on the secondary market. Elton's decision to authorize the reissues in the 2010s was a pivotal moment for the field, ensuring that Karla's insights were not lost to history. These reissued editions, curated with Elton's input, maintained the integrity of her original research while adding new context from researchers like Nick Pope and Linda Moulton Howe. The enduring relevance of Turner's work is evidenced by the ongoing interest in her theories across podcasts and digital media. Episodes of shows like the Holosky podcast continue to analyze her findings, noting that her cases remain some of the most bizarre and darkest in the history of ufology. Her focus on the nefarious agenda and the spiritual deception of the phenomenon continues to resonate, with a segment of the research community that remains skeptical of the benevolent visitor narrative. Ultimately, Dr. Karla Turner's life and work represent a profound challenge to our understanding of reality. As an academic who ventured into the darkest corners of the unknown, she brought a level of intellectual rigor and ethical clarity to a field often characterized by speculation and sensationalism. Her theory of the nefarious agenda was not born of cynicism, but of a meticulous analysis of the evidence, both physical and psychological. She revealed a world where human life is monitored, manipulated, and harvested by forces that operate behind a masquerade of deception. Turner's work is a testament to the power of the human narrative. By parsing the corrupted manuscripts of abduction memory, she uncovered a story of intrusion, collusion, and resistance that continues to haunt the margins of our civilization. Her legacy is a call to vigilance, an urging for humanity to recognize its own value in the face of a cosmic tyrant. As she wrote into the Fringe, the world changed irrevocably for her and her family, and through her research, she ensured that the rest of the world would at least have a map of the territory, however terrifying it might be.